Hetty. I'm the account manager here in St. Louis, Missouri. Appreciate everybody joining us today. We are recording this session, so it will be available if you or anyone else in your organization wants to take part in this after the fact. We have Mark Timmerman today joining us. He is on our Microsoft security team. He is a technical specialist who's going to be walking through the security components of Office 365. So whether you're looking at Office 365, you have it today, or you're considering any additional components of the Modern Workplace Suite, Mark will be able to walk through those components today. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Mark.
Sure. Thanks, Carson. Hi, everybody. My name is Mark Timmerman. I'm a technical solutions professional in our Modern Workplace team, specializing in security. So I'm going to go through our Microsoft 365 suite today. Most of this is going to be a demo. 5 slides here to start out that we'll attach, which is really meant to be more of a reference, but like to provide some initial context. So as we're going through and looking at how we can bundle things, I'm sure everybody who's purchased Office knows we certainly have our tiers and bundles. So as we're looking at Microsoft 365 at the E3 or the E5 level, really important to note that we have that Office pillar, the EMS pillar, and the Windows pillar as we go through. And then that sort of builds in and expands for E5. So we do have the reference here. We'll be talking about ATP, ASM, as well as getting into identity protection and endpoint management. Okay, so as we go through, from a concept standpoint, really we talk about the layers of data protection as we work our way through with device management policy. Starting at the identity layer, and as a note, if everybody could go on mute, that would be appreciated.
So Anthony asked me, we need to install Sigwin on the...
Right. So as we work through the layers of data protection, starting with the identity layer, looking at things like conditional access, multi-factor authentication, even scoping by regions of the world for people to be able to access. Then with device management, we can look at device-level policies as well as application-level policies for how we're going to protect on that device, and based on the type of device it is, whether it's a personal device or not. And then finally, with information protection, providing permissions at that file layer. So if the file is sent outside the company, those permissions are staying with the file. And then finally, final reference slide here for advanced threat protection. Good slide that we found where really when we start talking about ATP, Defender ATP, Azure ATP, and kind of what's included where as we're working across that Office pillar, the Windows pillar, or the EMS pillar. All right, so with that, let's get a little into the demo here. So coming in and starting with the Azure portal here, anytime you have an Office tenant, under the covers you have Azure Active Directory as the identity service. So one of the first things we talk about with customers who are starting with Office 365 is, how do I get my users set up with your identity provider? So we have a sync tool called Azure AD Connect that allows us to sync up those on-premise users into Office 365 or Azure AD. Once we have those users, we can then provision them for licenses. That can be an Office license, it can be access to third-party SaaS applications, device management, a variety of policies that can get applied. From a help desk standpoint, one of the things we see that generates a lot of interest is self-service password reset. So allowing users to self-serve for password reset, not having to call the help desk through portal.office.com. So when I come in to scope out that policy, I'm going to scope that out based on user group. And again, if these are sunk from on-prem, it's going to be the same set of groups that are coming from on-prem, or if you're creating them within the portal. Also then authentication methods. So this is independent of MFA. So to be able to do password reset, I have to be able to prove who I am. And this is where I set those methods: email, phone call, text message, or I can set up security questions. And then from a registration standpoint, if I set this to yes, when users come to sign back in, it's going to force them to register at least one of those password reset methods that I set up. All right. When we get into groups, groups are going to be important within Intune, for this is how we apply policy. When we're doing some of the identity management, you can do by single users, but as you start to scale up, group management does become critical when we get there for applying that. The other thing to note here is when we also get into device management, it's not only user groups, it can also be device groups. When we talk about importing some of that device information in, can certainly apply policy based on device group. All right, so then coming in for single sign-on, here's where I can have one unified platform for giving users access to all the applications they would need to perform their role. Also allows me to set certain access policies for when people can access those resources. So when I'm coming in to add an application, I can add an application through our gallery, which has a little over 2,900 applications, where I can come in and search for whatever it is that I'm looking to add to be able to set up single sign-on with. If my application is not in the gallery, if I have an on-premise IIS-based application, we have a connector to set up an application proxy to be able to connect. And then also, if it's an application that supports modern authentication and is not in the gallery, through the non-gallery application, we can go through it and set that up. So if I'm coming through, for example, here, if I'm looking to add Concur, and this is where really when we talk with customers that we have to go through and evaluate application by application. Because the thing we have to come in and look at is when I go into single sign-on, what single sign-on modes does the application support? So if I want to use the Azure AD service, SAML-based sign-on is going to be what I'm looking for. It's going to take me through doing the configuration here. Then I just assign licenses like I would assign Office licenses. Nice thing is for the applications in the gallery, we have the instructions included for that specific application. So it takes me through step by step for everything I need to do to configure that application for single sign-on. The other thing to note, so actually outside the SAML authentication, password-based single sign-on, we see this used most commonly with social media accounts. So if you have a company's social media that you want to allow people to post to, but have them have no idea what the actual credentials are, they can be just given access based on group membership. You can set that up with password-based sign-on. Also, the other option would be linked single sign-on. So in certain situations, Active Directory federated services or other third-party identity provider needs to be involved, so we can set up assign an URL to that link for routing there. Then provisioning. So a few dozen of the applications do support automatic account provisioning. So when I'm coming through and onboarding new users, when I go to onboard that user, it will give me the choice. I don't think Concur supports it, but I would have the automatic choice here, and it would allow me to set the default role for when I was going to provision somebody automatically. All right. So then, after I've set up my applications for single sign-on, I can also come out here and I can assign licenses. And really, conditional access is one of the other big security features that we talk about it. So adding name locations. So when I come through, I can specify a location. Used to be just limited on IP. Then a few months ago, we do now also have the ability to scope based on country. So if there are certain parts of the world that I know that nobody's signing in with, nobody's going to be doing business with my company from over there, I can blanket block certain areas of the world. So as I've gone through with the name locations, outside the US, inside the US for just how I scoped them. So how I take and utilize those then is when I come into policies and I'm going through and building my access policy. This allows me to come in and select based on user, based on group. So however I want to apply permissions for whatever they're accessing. So with these policies, it's what are we trying to protect. My advice here was don't scope out on all cloud apps or all users. Scope to specific apps. Just will eliminate any unneeded lockouts. So here, when I have those applications that are set up for single sign-on, it could be Exchange Online, it could be SharePoint Online, just depending on what you're looking for. And then I can look for certain conditions. So what am I going to trigger on? So I can trigger on sign-in risk. So based on our global footprint, we can usually deem if somebody is coming from a known risky source. So based on that classification, we can set up certain access policies based on that risk level. I can also set up based on the device platform that they're coming in from or the location. So when I'm looking at scoping on those named locations, I can come through, I can select mine for outside the US or in the US that I've posted here. And then once I've set those locations or by client app, I can then go through and have access controls. So maybe if outside the US, I want to block access. Or if not coming from a domain whitelisted IP, I can grant access but require multi-factor authentication. And then from a device standpoint, I can also make sure that it's a registered compliant device or that it's a domain joined device. So I also have the ability to limit based on device scope. So not the unsecured hotel lobby computer that everybody's accessing. I can control which types of devices can have access. All right. So session-based access control. So this only applies to SharePoint Online. What really this does, most common scenario, external non-whitelisted IP coming into a SharePoint doc library, limited browser experience so that you could only view content through the online apps, couldn't download anything. Everything would stay right within that session. Also, if there is integration that we've been supporting with RSA in Duo for MFA providers, we can add custom controls. So if you do have third-party MFA in certain scenarios, we can set up the integration right through the cloud service. Also, with the Azure AD Premium licensing, we talked about MFA in the cloud for coming in for access to SaaS applications. MFA on-premise server for protecting VPN, intranet sites, and RDP gateways. Okay, so then coming into device management with Intune, when we talk about devices here, it can be an iOS device, an Android device, or a Windows device. With the per-user licensing, it's kind of mix and match. We'll talk about some difference in company-owned devices versus bring your own device here in a few minutes. So as I'm getting started with Intune, really the rule is kind of work your way right down the list. So starting at the top with device enrollment, here's some of the initial administrative things I need to do. I have to set up my APNs to be able to push iOS apps. If I have any configurator profiles or if I'm enrolled within Apple's device enrollment program, I can import that information here. This also will tie into the device groups as we're applying permission. So then Android for work. Having integration with Android for work so you can present the applications there. Having work profiles, multiple profiles on the device. A new feature that we've been talking about a lot from a deployment perspective has been Windows Autopilot. So similar to Apple's device enrollment program, where the devices can be pre-added so that we can just configure the profiles on that Windows 10 machine right out of the box. Doesn't need to get sent to IT for imaging. The user can just have the device drop shipped to them, turn on the device, and they would just go through the out-of-box experience. The thing we're working on currently is the integration with the hardware providers, Surface and Lenovo, or Lenovo should be online pretty soon. Dell, HP, and others are coming later this year. Currently, they have to be added through a manual file through a CSV. So the deployment profile then is I just set what I want to have happen out of the box. So bypassing the EULA privacy settings, and if they're an admin or not. If this was the profile, in that case, then all they would have to do would be connected to Wi-Fi, put in their keyboard layout, and their password. Also through the cloud service, the provisioning, but then Windows Hello for Business. So supporting biometric authentication, PIN, second factor, whatever that might be. Enrollment restrictions, with looking at the per user licensing, I can certainly set a device limit. So by default, each user can register up to 5 devices. I can move that up or down as I would see fit. All right. From a policy standpoint, there's 2 types of policies, compliance policies and configuration policies. So compliance is going to be the minimum set of requirements. This would also tie back into conditional access that we looked at. So when I'm saying it has to be a registered compliant device, here's where I set what that compliancy is. Password, hard drives encrypted, not a jailbroken or rooted device, minimum and maximum OS versions. Windows is certainly a component of that, with encryption, password, the same. So anytime I have a policy or application, when I go in to click on that policy or application, here's where it's going to take me over to assignments. So this is where we have the integration again with Azure AD, where based on the groups that I have set up, I can come through and however I want to apply policy. All right. So then configuration policy. So if we're talking about a device that goes through full enrollment, and I want to apply group policy-like permissions to that device, on Windows 10, 1703 or later, I can push down PowerShell scripts. And then I also can configure profiles. So I have the ability per platform to come in for iOS, Wi-Fi, VPN, certificates, as well as device level restrictions. So things like access to the camera, Bluetooth, the store, depending on what I'm trying to limit. On the Windows 10 side, some of the more popular things when we get into endpoint protection, the ability to do BitLocker configuration through the cloud service. So if I want to configure what the BitLocker settings on that device are, I can go through and set that up. Also then from a profile standpoint, there certainly are custom profiles. If there's, some...
Yeah, she's there.
There's some XML options for that, as well as addition upgrade. If I do have the enterprise SKU, again with that per user license, I can just provide that here so anybody who enrolls would get that addition upgrade. And then when we get into the device level restrictions, similar to what you'd see in mobile with camera, access to the store, things like that, we'd also get into Edge. You have the ability to control what control panel items the users would see, what start menu items. So there is a very verbose set of controls from the Windows 10 side. All right, so then device management. So when I'm looking at what devices do I have enrolled, who's compliant, who's not compliant, maybe as a help desk resource, somebody's calling in, I'm having issues with my iPad. I can come in and I can click on that resource. This is where it would allow me to retire the device, a selective wipe or a factory reset. You can remotely lock it. I can remove the passcode. So if they did forget the passcode, I can remove it on their device so they can reset it, or I can restart the device. Also have the ability to see a general hardware profile, and then the managed applications that are installed. Very similar experience with a Windows device that's registered. That's a wipe pending one from yesterday. Selective wipe, full wipe. Can restart it. Can also issue a fresh start for Windows, and I can kick off Defender scans. All right. So then application management. So really the two big sections getting going here are going to be the policy and applications area. So I'm looking at fully enrolled devices. Here's where I can come through and I can add which applications I potentially want to make available to the end users. So when I'm come through, there's a different application types I can select. So if I'm looking to add an iOS app, it allows me to come out and just search right from the store. And it's going to pull back my results so I can select whatever I'm looking for. Other option, and much requested, was the ability to push Office 365 Pro Plus through the cloud service. So I can configure on Windows 10 and Mac OS the Office install for the enrolled device. And then if I have any line of business apps, MSIs, APKs, IPAs that I want to push down the installer files for, I certainly have the ability to do that. Okay, so then when we're coming through and looking at access to applications, just like policy, when I click on it, it's going to take me into assignments. And here's where, based on group membership, I can add whichever groups I'm looking to provision access. So with the Office applications, I do have some additional options. So with any application, available, required, uninstall. With the Office applications, I can make them available with or without enrollment. So what this will allow me to do is, if I am supporting bring your own device, or if I have users with personal devices, it'll just govern things within the application. It's not giving me full device level control over that, person's new shiny iPhone X or S9 or whatever it is. Just controlling things within the app. That is just limited to the Office applications, and those are covered under our application protection policies. So when I go in to build an application protection policy, being the app has to be wrapped, it is scoped to a smaller subset of applications. If you are developing an app, the app wrapping tool is free, so that you can wrap your personal app to make it available with or without enrollment, so you can certainly add more. And then when we're looking at those settings, these are profile level settings within the application. So preventing backup to iTunes, data transfer into and out of, save as, contact sync and printing, and even a PIN to get into the application. So again, having a smaller footprint on that person's personal device. And then here's where we can do the app selective wipe. Also integration with iOS VPP if you're participating in volume purchase. And then company portal. So for full enrollment, this allows you to customize the company portal app so that it just has some IT contact info and some company branding. This will really be the user's dashboard for, if they're not compliant, any potential available applications that they could choose to install. So you have that option. If for any reason you do have on-premise Exchange, when we're talking about this, Intune can be the gatekeeper into on-premise Exchange. It has to be at least Exchange 2010, ideally SP3 or later. And then a couple things with Intune Roles, just for role-based access control. So everybody who comes in is an admin. A few scope roles, or you can add custom. All right, so as we're working our way down, we've worked through identity, we've worked through device policy, as well as application level policies. Now we can get into file level policies with Azure Information Protection. So what I have the ability to do is configure policies that will stay with an application. Permissions are embedded in where I can set to have these default buckets for what should be classified. So I can apply certain protections. I can specify templates, or I can come in and I can add my permissions here for how I want to scope out the permissions that are contained. Also have the ability to do, if we have, with our plan 2, hold your own key. So if we're talking about highly sensitive company documents that are only to stay on-prem and only to be accessed by domain users, we can do hold your own key for integration with the ADRMS. With classification, we can also do things like setting a header or footer or a watermark on the document. And then we can do automatic classification. So when I'm coming through, and this is independent of Exchange transport, you can set certain things within your mail flow rules here to trigger on a lot of the same, sensitive fields. But this is if somebody's working on a Word document and I have them classified for information protection, this can automatically apply a set of permissions. So if they're working on bank routing number, anything I would choose to leverage that I want to flag for. So we do have pre-canned ones. A lot of these are going to center or have evolved out of GDPR for it being able to have that type of classification. We also do have custom. So if you have certain project keywords, things you're developing that you might want to match phrases or patterns, you can certainly set those up also. All right, so once I would select a condition, it's then going to ask me what I want to do when it hits that condition. So do I want to recommend a policy, or do I want to go ahead and automatically classify based on what they're hitting? Okay, so a couple of other things that we've seen interest in. Privileged identity management. So controlling who's an admin and when. I call these checkout accounts. So if you want to perform administrative functions on the tenant, that's fine, but we're going to scope that to a time. So if I come in and get approved to do my changes, I'm going to be scoped out to an hour or two. So if my account later does become compromised, hey, I'm not a full admin, so I'm limiting kind of the scope of damage there. Also with the advanced identity protection, as we're going through, this allows me to see, I'm not sure if I have any risky events yet, any risky events that are happening, but then also it flags for me vulnerabilities. So when I go through and look, what are some of the best practices, things that I can look to implement to make my environment more secure? So in this case, it's flagging, MFA registration for my users that are provisioned. And this will allow me to build a policy for that so that they can register. They can also set up alerting, so high alert policies, who should get notified from an admin set. All right. So coming over to Office 365, when we're getting to Office 365 security and compliance, some of the areas that we spend the most time talking about, and when we kind of get into this, almost all of them can almost be their own hour-long talk, at least, but centering around DLP policies. So when I'm looking at protecting things within Office 365, that applies to SharePoint, OneDrive, as well as Exchange. So when I'm going through and creating a DLP policy, I'm going to be leveraging the Azure Information Protection we talked about earlier, that I can create what I want to retain. So if I choose specific locations, it provides me what I want to protect and scope. And then my classification types, similar to the sensitive info types that we were looking at. maybe. There we go. So deciding what I want those to be. And if I want to turn on right away, or just test it. For this case, I'm just going to test it. And I'm not going to wait for that to fully finish. A couple of the other things we've been getting a lot of traction on. So within threat management, there was something that was just introduced this last week, or within the last couple of weeks, and it's our attack simulator. So what this is it goes through and really does a real-time attack so that you can check for, do I see any accounts that are vulnerable? So when I was playing with this, allows me to go through, for instance, the password spray attack. This is something that, comes up a little bit with us where we don't want to have certain passwords within our environment. So I can scope this to users or groups for whoever I want to flag. And Adam's kind of my guinea pig here. But we ran into a lot of customers that don't want to have certain passwords within their environment. For instance, when we've worked with professional sports teams, they don't want it to be like team name ! Certainly others that you can choose to look for, and when we're doing the dictionary attacks, it'll go through other common ones. But if you have certain ones flagged, this is something that we previously didn't kind of have an answer for if we wanted to make it custom ones. So this does allow you to see that. And then here would be our dictionary attack, and then looking at spear phishing for setting it up. So that's something that's very new that we've been getting a good response from. And then also when we come into policy here, this is going to get into our Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection for our safe attachments, safe links, anti-phishing, and anti-spam. On the call, I'm not going to go through each one of the areas, but it's the basic of configuring who is this scoped out to. Safe attachments is probably one of the most common ones as we're going through for deeming if something's a safe attachment or not. Detonating within a detonation chamber. So also when I turn this on, it is scoped to SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. So it is not just Exchange transport. So when I go through to add the policy here, when I scope it out, it's really what do I want to have happen. So dynamic delivery, I would say, is probably the most preferred option when we're going through, where it takes anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes on average to scan for delivery here. So delivering the body of the message, and then having a placeholder for the attached document. And then once scanning has finished, then the document will show up. So from a demo standpoint for Office ATP, really everything happens under the covers, doing the detonation to make sure it is a safe attachment, opening it up, see what it does, and then delivering it to the user. Also from the reports dashboard, if we've seen ATP before, this is where the reporting for ATP moved to, or everything will kind of be centered within security and compliance so that I can come in and see what's going on. What am I detecting from a spam standpoint, spoofing, whatever the case is. So having this dashboard available, protection.office.com. All right. One of the base things that I missed from the home within security and compliance, within Office 365, we have something called the Secure Score. So similar to what we're looking at with Advanced Identity Protection, where this gives us a score value based on what best practice security things that we have deployed within our environment. So when I'm looking at my score of 78 right now, and I want to improve my security posture, what are some of the things I can do to improve that? So as I go through it's going to list for me best practices, things that would be associated with that. So in this case, I don't think I have MFA set up for all my admins. So enabling that. Looking at audit data here. So if you're looking for things right within the portal that can help you improve your security posture and really give you that list that you can start checking things off of and sort of see what that mix is. So then back within service assurance, when we're coming in here, here is where I would set, based on where I'm located at and what industries I'm in, what compliance I would have. So when I'm looking at getting help with compliance, here's where I can pull different compliance reports based on what I would need for meeting that compliance. And then within settings, here's where I define what that is. I can define that by regions. Again, you can multi-select as well as industries, and you can come through and also multi-select there. All right, so stepping back into Office and looking at doing some monitoring within Power BI from a sign-in standpoint, pre-can report for Azure Active Directory activity logs. So if I want to look and see where are people signing into my tenant, what applications are they using, we can even get into looking at who's doing password reset, are they getting any errors. So pre-can Power BI dashboard allows me to come drill in sign-ins by location. I can filter by certain users. So if I'm doing reconnaissance, want to see what's going on, I can see where they've signed in from by IP, device type, even the browser they're coming in from. Also like app trends and usage, just so you can kind of see what's going on there. And then looking at password reset. So from a Power BI standpoint, this is pre-canned. If I go into get data and within services, there's going to be the Azure Active Directory activity logs. All I have to do is be an Office 365 admin and type in my domain name, and it pulls in that report. All right, so with about 5 minutes left here to leave some time for Q&A. Cloud App Security is going to be our holistic monitoring for users' activity in the cloud as well as on-prem. So when we're going through our Cloud App Discovery dashboard is really going to allow us to see and break down what happens when I do discovery of what's in my environment, how can I investigate and build policy around that. So when we go through and look at Cloud App Discovery, I like to use the dashboard so that I can come through and see what applications are within my environment and what's getting used. Like, is it what I would expect? Are there high-risk apps that I'm seeing that are generating data? This is also where I can look for shadow IT. Are people using, Box or Dropbox when they shouldn't be, and they should be using OneDrive? So just doing that initial reconnaissance to see what's going on gives me different ways to sort. Again, based on apps, there's some scoring that goes in there, or IP address or user. Also, from an investigation standpoint, here's where I can come in and drill into users' accounts, file access, but then also if I do have third-party applications that I'm using, we do have integration set up with a few that have their APIs publicly available. So if I am using a Salesforce or a ServiceNow or an Okta, there is integration that is set up. So when I'm looking at building control policies with information protection as to what can be copied where, it can certainly cover these third parties also. And then the final aspect, again, is building policy. So when I come in to create policy, there's a plethora of policy types, from activity policy to file policy, as we're looking at what's shared. This is also where it gets to be very customized. If there are certain things that you're looking to filter on or alert on, we can certainly build things there. So that's a real quick walkthrough of Cloud App Security. Cloud App Security really is probably an hour, at least an hour discussion on its own, but the alerting will kind of show you what's going on. Okay, well, from a content standpoint, that's pretty much the extent of what I have. Again, certainly can have breakouts on a lot of those different sections as we went through. We wanted to have this lunch and learn so we can, show you what's out there. A lot of, myself and other resources on my team that would specialize in Exchange and Windows also. We can certainly have breakouts on all these topics. We just kind of wanted to give you a little feel for some of the stuff that we talk about, as well as, present, some of the new stuff with the attack simulator and some of that. So Carson, I'll kick it back to you. I had Sean and Justin, I think, were flagging any questions within chat. So guys, if we're good there, or if anybody wants to come off mute and ask any questions, we certainly can do Q&A.
Heather, can link sign-on be used to allow a second Office 365 tenant, Azure AD, as a trusted ID provider?
No. So you're talking about if I have two tenants and I want to set up single sign-on into tenant 2 through?
With tenant 1's users?
No. I'll double check, but from my understanding, no, you cannot.
So that feature is specific for just ADFS only?
Chances are we would need some type of claims provider there, yes.
Yes, this is Dominic Sable with PPC Group. I have a question regarding actually the protection that we get around email-centric phishing attacks, like spear phishing. Is there any kind of heuristics or like pattern recognition that's integrated in these security products to help us, see any type of strange emails going out, whether internally or from known external sources, and what kind of protection does it offer if you have it?
Yeah, I'm going to pivot to Sean from our team, who's the Exchange guru, to handle that.
Yeah, hey, this is Sean. So as far as from like an attachment scanning standpoint, from a heuristics point of view, Exchange Online Protection is going to hit everything first, and that's where we're going to have multiple AV engines that are going to look for, typical, known hashes, known bad actors coming through the system. Where advanced threat protection kicks in, we actually sandbox the attachment into virtual containers that have various versions of Windows and Office applications and third-party tools installed, and then we detonate the attachment. We poke it in these virtual chambers to see what it does, because a lot of payloads don't kick in until a user does something inside of the attachment. And for all the scanning, we're not doing it based on like known hashes or anything. We're looking for malicious activity and then taking action on it. Does that answer your question?
So actually what we've noticed is often it's not the attachment itself that's malicious, or the link that's malicious, but there's inside the attachment, there's a link, for example, that users click on, and then they enter their credentials. So these malware actors have gotten really smart, and I don't know what type of actions we can take. So it's not the sandboxing of the attachment, it's more specifically recognition of certain types of emails where, you know, there are links to sites where people enter their credentials. And,
yep,
you know,
I don't want to
everything is legit until people enter their credentials and, you know.
Yep, so that's a pretty typical phishing attack, and so that would be our other option we have in advanced threat protection called safe links. So we have another option specifically for what you're describing, where any links that are found in an email or inside of an Office document, like inside of Word or PowerPoint or Excel, those links are all examined in real time and detonated in the same way that we do our attachments, and they are checked to be safe or not, the links. So when you click on the link, you're actually redirected to our safe link service, and if there's anything bad found at all about that site, we display a big red warning page that says you shouldn't go here. If the site is found to be fine, you're sent to the site none the wiser, and you have no idea that your links have been filtered. And again, that's all part of our advanced threat protection offering for Office 365.
Inside ATP, can you describe the anti-phishing? Because that's new.
Yeah, at a real high level, the way the anti-phishing works is you create policies to protect certain individuals in your environment, like maybe, you know, your CIOs, your CEOs, you know, whatever, people that you know might be the targets of, you know, spoofing or phishing attacks. And then what happens is through the new protections that we have, you'll start to see reporting available for all the various emails coming in. Like maybe you've got some legitimate spoofing that's happening in your environment, you know, for like newsletters or, you know, external sources sending, you know, mail on, you know, as you. You can flag that as being okay and continue to allow that mail coming through the system. But you'll also get insight into a lot of mail that's being sent that probably isn't, you know, what you're expecting or what you're wanting. And with those policies in place, it gives you those protections. It also will flag up some notifications like in the Outlook client, you know, about potential threats being found. And it gives you the ability to take action on those from the admin center in our security and compliance center.
Okay, so I'm going to call the meeting then, if there's no other questions. Carson, if people are looking to get the recording, how is that going to be shared, or is there